Hello guys, so let's get SSL working on our local host. So first of all, we're gonna restructure a little bit how we build our container. So we're not gonna be referencing the image straight away in here. We're instead gonna create a Dockerfile for our Nginx service. So in here I'm gonna create a new file and it's going to be Dockerfile. Great. And now in our Docker Compose, what we can do, we can say build, and we can specify context, which is Docker Nginx. Image name, we're just gonna keep it as it is, but we want to replace the name, so we need to put it in a single quote. That's all what we need to do. Now in our Docker file, we want to build from Nginx Alpine. Let me quickly grab Nginx Alpine Docker Hub version of Nginx image. So we're gonna use the latest one, which is this one. So let me copy this, copy, and go back, and we're gonna do this. So that should all work. So let's quickly confirm by going back to terminal. Let's see if the containers are running. I think they are. And now we're gonna rebuild. So we're gonna do docker compose -- build force recreate, and I forget app and d. One sec. App -d. And another thing we can do, we can specify the service we want to rebuild. So if we say Nginx, this will only rebuild Nginx container, but also will rebuild the containers which are dependent. So in this case, because we linked some of the other containers such as MySQL or PHP, those gonna have to be recreated as well. So let's run this quickly and see what happens. As you can see, recreating PHP, MySQL, and Nginx, Docker, PS. Everything is running. Quickly checking the browser, and everything is working as expected. So now, in order to get SSL working in our development domain, we will need to generate a SelfSigned certificate. And on my GitHub page, you will find a shell script which will help you to do that. So as you can see here, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna run this script during the build. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just grab row and grab this URL and go back to my terminal, and from here let's just clear that. Let's go to cd docker nginx, and here we're gonna create a new directory called SSL. So mkdir SSL and cd to it, and now we can pull this file, and we got it. Let's go back to our code editor, so you'll see we've got the script in here. Now I want everything to be automated as much as possible, so I don't want to edit multiple files. So if you look in here, it's a base domain, and we want to be pulled from our .env. The problem is we can't really do that because there is no way to actually access environment file from our container, because what we need to do, we need to copy this file into our container and run the script. So what we can do instead, we're gonna go back to our Docker Compose. So in our Docker Compose, what we can do, we can specify some arguments. So we can do args, and we're gonna set a new argument which is gonna be dev domain, and to this argument we're gonna assign our variable from our .env. So it's gonna be dev domain. Great. And now if we go to our Dockerfile, what we can do, we can assign this argument to a variable. So we're gonna do arg, we need to grab it first, arg dev domain, and then we're gonna assign it to environment variable. So it's gonna be environment dev domain to dev domain. So now we can quickly confirm that we actually got access to this variable by running run echo dev domain. Let's save that, go quickly to our terminal and clear this and click recreate our Nginx container. And as you can see in the output here, we've got access. We successfully passed our value from .env to our Dockerfile. So next, what we can do, we can copy this script into our container and run it from our container in order to generate a certificate. So let me quickly go back to PHP Storm. So I'm just gonna get rid of that. So now what we want to do, we want to copy this script into our container. So what I'm gonna do copy, and we will do SSL generate SSL SSL.sh, and we're gonna copy this into our Nginx container, into etc Nginx generate SSL. So that's where we want it now. So this will grab this file, copy into our container, but now if we try to execute this script, we will have permission issues. So what we need to do, we need to adjust permissions on the script. So we're gonna do run chmod +x. So this will set executable flag on the file, and what we want to do, we want to set this flag on this file. So now this file will be executable. And finally, we want to run the script. So we're gonna do run, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna cd into etc Nginx, and from there we're just gonna run our shell script. So we're just gonna do generate SSL .sh. So as I mentioned before, in our script we want to be able to access our .env variable. So if I go back to our Dockerfile, so we set this variable in here, and this script will be executing during the build. So we got access to this variable. So what we can do in our script, instead of saying or hard coding this value, we can just use our variable, and that will work just fine. So let's quickly confirm that. I'm gonna save that, and I'm gonna go back to terminal, and I'm just going to rebuild our container, and hopefully everything is just gonna work fine. Okay, and we got issue, we can't execute bash. Okay, so as you can see, we use bash, and by default bash is not installed in Alpine images. So what we can do, we can quickly install bash before we can run this command. So we're going to do run apk update, and we want to add bash. So we're going to do end apk add, and we can install bash for now. Also, this script uses OpenSSL to generate a certificate, so we need to have OpenSSL installed as well. So we're going to do OpenSSL as well, and try to rerun this and see if we are able to generate the certificate. So let's go back and try to rerun this again, and we'll see if it's gonna work or not. And as I can already see, the certificates were generated. So if I do docker ps, Nginx is running. So let's quickly SSH into container. So we're gonna do docker exec it my project Nginx. And now, because we installed bash, we can SSH with the bash as our shell. So I can do that. If I go to cd etc Nginx and list the files, you will see we've got our self-signed certificate generated. So now we're gonna be able to use it in our virtual host. So let me quickly just inspect ssl.cert.crt, and as you can see, this is our certificate. Okay, let's quickly go back. So now let's create our new virtual host for SSL. So I go back to our code editor and let me create just another vhost here. So I'm gonna do a new file, vhost SSL, and let's just do that. I'm just gonna copy and paste the contents, and this is very standard, very basic configuration to run SSL. Now again, we don't want the domain to be hard coded, so what we can do, we can again pull our environment variable. Whoops. So let me just do that quickly. So we want to replace this in here. By the way, first server block is to redirect all the traffic from port 80 to port 443. So non-HTTPS to HTTPS. Let's do that, and also we need our server name here. Now just to quickly test if everything is working, we are gonna change vhost SSL. Let's go back very quickly. So like I said, this is a very basic configuration. We still got our location for PHP, so every single file with the extension of PHP will be using fastCGI and so on in PHP. Here we've got our certificates linked. Those are the ones. This is a certificate and a private key, so the ones which we already created on our container, so they're going to be linked in here. So if I go back to our terminal and quickly try to run this, so let's just recreate our Nginx container and see what happens. Let's just list our containers, Dockerps, and as you can see, Nginx is not running. So what you can do in this kind of situations, you can check the logs. So we can check the logs because obviously Nginx didn't start, so we can do docker logs and name of the container. That will give us the logs which Docker created, so we will be able to find out what actually happens. So we do docker logs my project dash Nginx, and it says unknown def domain variable. So this is not a problem with the container itself, it's a problem with Nginx. So Nginx can't start because found unknown variable, and I suspect this is the problem on our redirect. So let me quickly remove that and let's try to rerun this. And as you can see, Nginx is running. Okay, so what's the problem? I quickly show you. If I SSH into our Nginx container, exec -it my project Nginx sh let's quickly go to the conf file. So it's going to be cd etc nginx conf.d, and let's see if we got it. Yeah, so let's do cut default. So that's our file. So here's the problem. Because we pass this as a variables from our .env, as you can see, the variables itself are not expanded, so Docker can handle this for us to some extent, but then we may run into some issues with Nginx, because if we got our redirect and we return 301, then Nginx is complaining about unknown variable. So what we can do instead, well, ideally we don't want to have this variables reference like that. We would like to have our domain instead of reference the variable. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create another shell script. So if we go back to our code editor, so I'm going to create another directory called vhosts. So vhosts, and inside we're going to create the bash script. So we do vhost .sh. Great, we got our shebang. Now we're gonna do exactly the same as we did with SSL generate SSL script. So in our Dockerfile, what we're gonna do during the build, we're gonna copy the script, adjust the permissions, and we're gonna run it. So what the script will do, it will actually generate our vhost. So in this way we're not gonna have any variables in our vhost. We can have all outputted as a plain text. So what we can do, we're gonna have a conditional here, and ideally I would like to have another variable in my .env, something like nginx SSL true or false, and generate vhost conditionally. So what I'm gonna do, if then, and we're gonna have else, and another one. I'm gonna close conditional. So our condition is going to be, we're gonna be checking if our variable is true or false. So in this case we're gonna have something like, I don't know, nginx SSL, and if this is equal to true, create our vhost for SSL. If it's not, then create the standard virtual host. So inside here we're going to do cut, and we can use the configuration file, so etc nginx conf.d and our default.conf. Then we will have that. We're gonna use AOF, so we can write to the file with multiple lines. So AOF, and now here, actually let me just copy this and put that in here as well, because we're going to do exactly the same thing. So now here we can have our SSL vhost, so we're just going to grab all of that, Control-C, and we're going to paste it in here, and this is looking good. And next we're going to grab our vhost standard one from here, and we're going to put it in here. So now, as you can see, I mean, I already did that for this one, but in here we don't want these variables to actually expand, because we don't set them. Those are Nginx specific ones, so we're gonna have to escape them. So let's escape all the variables, and the only one variable we are interested in is our dev domain variable. Now, how we gonna pass this variable? So we're gonna do exactly the same what we did with our generate SSL. So in this case, we already got this this variable accessible because this variable is in our Dockerfile, passes an argument and set to environment variable. So to be honest, in vhost we don't have to really do anything extra to our dev domain variable. So I can just do that. I can remove curly braces anywhere else and here. But now we still don't have our Nginx SSL, so let's quickly create this variable. So let's go to our env. Actually, let me just grab this so I don't make any typos. So if I go to our .env, we're gonna have our variable here, and we can specify the value. So let's say false for now. And next, what we need to do, we need to go back to our Docker Compose and pass this as an argument. So we're gonna do this Nginx SSL, and this is going to be one sec. So we're gonna assign the value from our .env, and now we should have access in our Dockerfile. But what we need to do is we need to do argument. So we're gonna grab our argument and we will set this as a variable env. So now let's pass it again. So now we've got access to this variable, so when we execute our vhost script, we're gonna have access to our Nginx SSL. So let's try to run our script. So I'm gonna do exactly the same as we did in here, but we're just gonna change a few things. So we're gonna copy the file from vhosts and vhost.sh into vhost.sh, and now we need to adjust the permissions. So we need to make this script executable. So here we go, and then we can run it, and that's it. And as you remember, our Nginx SSL is set to false. Let's just quickly inspect before we move on. I think everything should be fine and looks fine. Oh, we forget about let me quickly grab it. We forget about our redirect, so let's quickly do that. Return, this needs to be escaped as well. Oops, not this way, this way. And then this one needs to be escaped, and our dev domain. You know what? Let's just do HTTPS, and here we can reference our domain. So I'm gonna grab this and put that in there. So yeah, that looks all good. So let's just quickly test that. So now if I jump into terminal and try to rebuild our container, we will see if it's actually working. SSL was created, hopefully vhost was created. So let's give it another second, and let's check if Nginx container is running. It looks like it's running, so let's quickly just SSH into it. Docker exec-it my project -nginx sh, and let's check the contents of our configuration file. So we do cd etc nginx conf.d, and let's do cat if something is not quite right. Something is not quite right. Oh, I know what it is. 1 second. So what happened? So the script was executed, but in our Docker Compose, we still got our file mounted, our vhost here. So what we need to do, we need to actually remove this line, and let's try to rerun it. So let's check again, docker ps. Looks like it's running. SSH cd etc Nginx whoops conf d okay card default, and as you can see we've got expected results. So now we don't have anymore our domain as our variable from .env, and because we set our Nginx SSL to false, we've got our standard virtual host. So let's quickly just change that to true and try to rerun it. And as you remember before, our Nginx failed to start. Let's see what's gonna happen now. So let's quickly recreate. So docker ps, Nginx is running, so let's just ssh cd etc Nginx conf d cat default, and everything looks fine. So we got our vhost for our SSL. So now we should be able to test in the browser if this is actually working. So let's navigate to our browser and see if we can actually reach our web development domain, and something is not quite right. Okay, let's quickly go back to our PHP storm and see what happens. Generate, that's okay. Everything looks fine here. Oh, okay. So we didn't expose the ports because as you may know, SSL is running on port 443. So let's do two things. In our Docker Compose on the very end, let's just make sure we've got the right ports exposed. So let's do expose 80 and expose port 443. 443. Let's save that. And now in our Docker Compose, we need to specify another port, which is going to be 443 to 443. And now let's quickly try to recreate our container. So let's do exit and recreate that. And hopefully after that we should be able to see our page. So if I refresh, okay, so now everything is working. You see we are able to connect to our web development domain, but now we run into another issue. So now we will be able to proceed to our project, but as you can see, it's marked as a connection is marked as insecure, and this is a problem because certain services won't work properly. For example, service worker won't work, and you will have issues if you're gonna make API calls on this domain and all sorts of things. So what we need to do, we need to add this certificate as trusted, because at the moment the error is that the certificate has not been verified by a third party. Obviously this is a self-signed certificate. So what we can do, we're gonna add this certificate to trusted certificates, and we're gonna do that by doing this. So you will, okay, again, so you will click on certificates, then you will have your certificate here. You can just drag it to your desktop, and you can add certificates to trusted on different operating systems in different ways. I'm just going to show you how to do it on Mac. So what we want to run our keychain, and in system we're just going to drag and drop. It will prompt you for a root password. And then we can double click on the certificate and set trust, always trust, and we're gonna commit that. So okay, so now this certificate should be added to trusted. If we try to refresh, you can see the connection is secure, certificate is valid. So now you can do your local development and take full advantage of testing on SSL. Just another thing you might want to do if this is still not working, you want to go to a new tab in your Chrome and you want to write Chrome flags allowing secure localhost, and if you go there, you want to make sure that this option is enabled. So enable that, relaunch, and check again, and all it's working fine. Okay, cool. So we've got our SSL up and running. Let's quickly go back to our PHP storm and clean some things up. So we definitely don't need our virtual hosts anymore, so we can delete these two files. So let me just delete them, delete this one and delete this one. And now we're gonna be managing our virtual host in our shell script, so I don't think this is a big problem. Now one thing worth mentioning is that let me quickly pull my terminal, one sec. It's here. Okay, so one thing worth mentioning is that if you stop your containers, so if I do docker compose stop, and you will do docker compose up -d, and I forget about dash as always. So if you bring your containers up and you're not gonna go back to the browser, your SSL will be still working. So the thing worth mentioning is that new SSL won't be created until proper build is triggered. So if I go back to Dockerfile, so as you can see, this command is gonna be triggered only on build. So if you just stop and recreate your containers and bring them up, this won't be an issue. Even if let's say we made some changes to this file, even if we try to run docker compose, try to force the build, recreate, and I forget append, so up-d, this still shouldn't be an issue, because what is happening, we're still going through the build process, but Docker is using a cache, so it won't actually generate new certificate, if I'm correct. So let's just quickly verify that, and yeah, it's still working. So if you would like to generate a new certificate, you would have to actually make some changes into this file. So let me just add space, let me just add a return, and let's try to do it now. So now it's still not triggering. Yeah, it did. So now, as you can see, we generated a new certificate, and in order to be able to take full advantage of SSL again, you're gonna have to repeat the steps, such as adding your certificate to trusted. But that won't happen very often during normal development, as you're not gonna be constantly rebuilding your local development environment.